Did you ever wonder why we went from an obesity rate of 13% in the 1960s to an obesity rate of over 50% today? Well, I'm Dr. Simpson. I'm here to tell you that story. If you like this information, give me a follow. It turns out that we have four particular factors that have led to the rise in obesity, all of which come down to increased caloric consumption. Number one, the rise of ultra-processed food. We went from about 15% of our diet in the 1960s to nearly 60% of our diet today. Ultra-processed food are those foods which are defined as things you're not going to typically find in your kitchen, but they're high in fat, they're high in sugar, they're high in salt, they're low in protein, and they're low in fiber. Number two is the rise of eating out. As more and more people started to eat out, going from about 10% of the time to almost 50 or 60% of the time today, they tend to consume more calories. You want to get your value for the money you pay for your meal. Number three, just pure calories in general. From the 1970s to the 1980s and 90s, the average human ate 200 calories more a day. Now that doesn't sound like much. 200 calories isn't that much, but calculate that over a 10-year period and you'll see a rise of 100 pounds or 200 pounds for affected individuals. And finally, besides the rise of ultra-processed food, besides the rise of going out, we had diet culture. And diet culture went to extremes. But diet culture was, in fact, seeing the rise in obesity and people wanting to lose those few pounds, but they kept going from one diet, the popular ones early on were the low-carb diets, to another diet, or the whole food plant-based diet. Nothing wrong with eating whole food plant-based, but if you start going to extremes, you're missing out on important foods that are good for your health. Ultra-processed food rose predominantly because they had more food that had to be used. In the United States, because of food changes in the 1970s, trying to get rid of starvation, which was a problem in the 1960s, we overproduced corn, soy, and wheat. That led to a lot of materials that we had, such as high fructose corn syrup. Now, high fructose corn syrup by itself isn't the problem, but all of a sudden we had huge consumptions in sugary sweetened beverages, for example, which high fructose corn syrup is in. Pretty much high fructose corn syrup and sugar are about the same chemical compounds. Your body deals with them the same. Turns out that when you start having an average of 1 to 2 sugary sweetened beverages a week, going to where your average size sugary sweetened beverage is 32 ounces and having more than 1 or 2 a day, you're going to have a rise in calories and a rise in obesity. Some people blame seed oils or vegetable oils. They are a cheap form of calories which were produced and placed into ultra-processed food. They're not the villain, they simply rose with the calorie numbers. Some people blame sugar itself. It's not the villain either. All of those things combine. But consider this, when you're eating those potato chips, that little tiny bag of potato chips, you can eat a family-sized bag just as well as a larger-sized bag because of the lack of the ability to turn off your appetite and saying you're full. So as time has gone on, we have cured the problem of starvation, but we have led with the problem of obesity. And the problem of obesity particularly hits people who are in food desert areas, where the only cheap and reasonably reliable food you can get is ultra-processed. So what do? Well, we're seeing changes in obesity that have decreased because of the new GLP-1 drugs, which have had a dramatic reduction in obesity, and the newer ones that are coming out are going to be even better. Number two, there's finally an understanding that the extremes of diet culture don't work, and people need to eat more of a whole food plant-based diet with a little bit of meat, more fish, more legumes, and less sorts of things like the ultra-processed foods. You have to understand that people have to feed their families, and if you're poor and you can feed your families for $12 at McDonald's, you're going to probably do that as opposed to buying the fancy organic cabbage that's shown at the grocery store. All of these increase in consumption of calories, the way we eat, where we eat, has led to our obesity crisis. What's the answer? We have to eat better. But for those people who have now hit the obesity time, is now needing medical help because that's where we are. And simply telling them to put the fork down or eat less, it just doesn't work.